Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole of Tuesday, June 28th to order. We're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And I'd like to welcome Alternative Director Monroe to the board. Director Arbor is at the Island Corridor Foundation today. And we have Director Swift online. So just a little recap. In our previous episode, we had deferred the regional parks decision to the meeting later today, but because there wasn't a number of questions asked and some more information requested of staff, we've brought forward that information to the Committee of the Whole to be discussed by the board today. So we'll go to reports. We have the Regional Parks and Trails Service Establishment bylaw options.
Second.
Hillian and Cole Hampson, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and thank you for agreeing to come together today. I'll just ask the kids table to give a brief summary of regional parks, how we got to where we are, and the response to the questions that are included in the report. So Alana, followed by Doug, and Jake will provide a brief introduction, and then we're available to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Russell. Through Madam Chair. This service is about the big picture. It's about thinking and planning like a region for current and future residents. A regional parks service could provide opportunities for collaborative policy and decision-making, respecting land acquisition that we are otherwise challenged to deliver. Through this service, you could establish guiding principles and a decision-making framework together to thoughtfully consider the strategic acquisition of land parcels offered to you through development negotiation or offered as gifts to the community. With a steady requisition and the opportunity to hold reserves, you would position the Comox Valley very well to actively pursue land acquisition that would enable both you and future decision makers to achieve a range of objectives. In many ways, a regional park service is an excellent complement to your regional growth strategy. The regional growth strategy establishes the overarching regional policy framework, and a regional park service could support its implementation through the ownership and management of key public assets. A service of this kind would afford you and future decision makers the opportunity to establish regional connectivity for the purposes of recreation, habitat conservation, and active transportation, as well as the opportunity to secure land and manage parcels that could play a key role in areas such as watershed health, reconciliation with First Nations, and climate change mitigation. You have been presented with a carefully well-researched service option grounded in best practices that could enable you to respond as a federation to public calls for the conservation of special places throughout the valley. Arguably, your efforts to establish the framework that would guide this work is best tackled in partnership with each other. Through this service, you could coordinate requests for funding to show senior government and other funders and possible landowners a concerted, coordinated acquisition and management plan that is grounded in regional planning and regional thinking, supported by all service participants. Ultimately, a service of this nature could be used to help tackle some of our most wicked, pernicious challenges, such as climate change, the erosion of the public commons, and the diminishing number of natural places in our valley. A regional park service could give us the ability to enhance livability of this place for at least the next 7 generations. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alana.
So if I may, through the chair, I'd just like to remind us how we got here today. We're not breaking new ground considering a regional park service. The CSRD had a regional park service without a requisition limit. It enabled the security of many of our foundational electoral area parks, including Mount Jeffrey, Seal Bay, Nymph Falls. Many regional districts have and are successfully moving down the path, as we've saw outlined in Alan's background study around the regional park service model. Our accessible and relatively small geographic region is perfect for a system that's equitable to all of your citizens. So over 5 years ago, your parks manager sat down and recognized the benefits of a regional service. Largely, this was spawned by the trend of more closed gates popping up, forested areas being developed, neighborhood greenway connections just disappearing. Many of these were done appropriately by private property owners who legally blocking access to these areas within their rights, but also making it difficult for people to enjoy the nature, which is the very reason people moved and visited here. Most recently, your staff have worked collaboratively together with a consultant as directed by this board with firsthand discussions with electoral areas and councils, bringing forward the recommendations of the government structure and a 2/3 majority. With the service, the next steps are guided by a full and substantial public process, creating an overall community vision for the future conservation of important ecosystems, recreation areas, and connectivity through greenways. The end result will be a reflection of our citizen values. It is also worth noting major financial decisions will still require electoral consent in the future. Finally, an old track and field saying of passing the baton must be reflected on as today we hold the baton, which was passed to us from ideas of people and generations before us. Some of those hands holding this baton with us today are the supportive nonprofits such as the CVLT, and others are larger scale minded objectives such as reduction in GHGs and the future role of forest ecosystems, or creating a place for nature in our community to do our part for protected and conserved areas across the country. We know the baton will be passed on for generations to come and hope the partnership hands of the future include Comox First Nation, local nonprofits, senior local level governments, and of course, our elected officials representing our citizens' values in the future, whatever our collective desires may be. On this last note, the report outlines some of the considerations you've asked us to consider at the first bylaw reading, and Jake will do a quick overview, and then we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Doug and Alana, for those comments. Yeah, so I'll provide a quick verbal summary, and I've got a bit of a short presentation just to help summarize the staff report that's before the board. So this report obviously responds to the interest and direction provided at the June 14th meeting, in which the board expressed some interests and questions around certain aspects of the service. The three topics covered are the alternative governance concept, essentially the notion of trying to address the potential veto that Courtney could have should a 75% approval threshold be included in the bylaw. The second is the legislative implications. Should only a portion of the electoral area be included in the service boundary? The board, that notion was raised, and so the board requested information on that. And then lastly is there was some commentary and some interest expressed around the maximum requisition and whether that should be included in the service establishment bylaw. So on the alternative governance concept, just want to start by saying that yes, the inclusion of a language to essentially stipulate that decisions could not be defeated by only one jurisdiction is technically feasible. But staff are essentially not recommending this, and the primary reason for it is the jurisdictional consideration that would be incorporated into this and its influence on the decision-making process. Regional bodies, as the board is aware, includes representatives from the municipal councils as well as electoral area directors. And typically there is, or commonly there is not that jurisdictional consideration. It is a threshold based on the total votes that are provided from all the different individuals that are around the table. And in regards to the kind of municipal capacity, there's often talked about the kind of two hats that are worn, the municipal council hat and the regional district hat. And that's inspired all kinds of questions around whose interests do those municipal directors serve? Is it their council? Is it their individual beliefs and political inclinations? Are they there to simply toe the line, so to speak, from their council wishes? Or are they there on their free own to make their own decisions? And what happens when there's conflicting interests in regards to that municipal hat and potentially that regional district hat? So the complexity and the nature of those questions is certainly not new, and governance consultants such as Eli Mina and others have considered this and provided presentations to boards and written articles on it in various stages. And they've all, I think, generally painted the picture that of how to help navigate these situations, although albeit it's still, in my view, a complex situation. Overall, the principle that's suggested by governance experts is that members around the table are duty bound to the decision-making body that they sit at. So in the case of the regional library board, for instance, if the director is appointed to that board, you're duty bound to make decisions with the best interests of that body in mind, not that of the body that may be appointed you to that. That helps really kind of cast how decisions are made in a typical process. The board or any board is looking to make a decision based on a knowledge base to help hopefully make a decision that is both informed and balanced. And so in a typical process, you can imagine that prior to a meeting, a municipal director may seek input or advice from either their council colleagues or perhaps community members or otherwise. And that is when they're certainly wearing that municipal council hat in which they're wearing. At the meeting itself, and the director may share that perspective, certainly is encouraged to share that perspective, those interests that either the council has expressed or that they're bringing forward from the community. And still, again, they're wearing that municipal hat. After that, at some point, certainly then it is incumbent upon the director to then put on that regional district hat, the body that they are then sitting on at that board, and then to listen and learn from the other directors that are sharing their opinions, whether those opinions are from the municipal hats or the regional district hat, the staff that are presenting information on the topic, and as well as the other directors' feelings and the public, of course, and the feedback that may be provided through that. So they're listening, they're learning, and then when the voting occurs, of course, that it's incumbent upon to be continuing to wear that regional district hat so that they're making the decisions in the best interest of the regional board with their regional interests. So the complexity and the challenge of this, as I said, is acknowledged. But based on that, it's not viewed by staff that it would be advisable to include a jurisdictional consideration in that process, because at some point, as it's been suggested, the local hat should be taken off and the regional hat should be put on in that decision-making process. So incorporating this jurisdictional consideration adds further complexity to that and perhaps negatively influences the process. With respect to the legislative approval process, put simply, all regional district establishment bylaws as guided by the Local Government Act must receive the approval of both the inspector of the municipalities and participating area approval. Participating area approval can come in a variety of formats, but essentially municipalities have the authority to provide council consent as municipal or as participating area approval, and electoral area directors only have limited ability to do so in regards to certain services and what includes the entire electoral area boundary. So if there was only a portion of an electoral area boundary included, it would both then no longer be eligible as a regional parks and trail service, because it clearly wouldn't be the entire region, and it would not allow the electoral area directors, either A, B, or C, to then consent on behalf of the electors for participating area approval. So an alternative approval process or a referendum would have to be conducted. And clearly this would have implications on the timeline for the potential establishment of the service. So I think we've attached as part of the staff report a rough timeline based on the proposed approach in which electoral area and municipal consent would be provided. That sees this process come to a conclusion before the end of this term in September. But should a boundary adjustment be sought, we'd be looking at 2023 for sure for any kind of approval or establishment. One slide missing here, but the other aspect here was the maximum requisition, in which basically there was interest expressed around the whether it should be included or not. The Act provides that for regional parks and trail service, the maximum requisition is not a requirement to be included in the service establishment bylaw, but the board had expressed some interest in whether that should be included. I would note, of course, that the board is considering a higher approval threshold generally for decisions, and so that would certainly cast a balance to making decisions around service taxation increases or service decisions generally, ensuring that there's broader support for these decisions. The other three factors to consider is the consideration of around acquisition strategy or some sort of longer future looking plan to help guide the decisions as we go forward. The annual consideration of the financial plan. So the board would be passing the budget annually. to establish what are the tax requisition or other revenues that may come in to help support the service. And then finally, as I think Doug mentioned earlier, there's also the requirement that if should a large purchase that requires long-term borrowing be sought, elector approval would be required to provide that participating area approval on that borrowing bylaw. So a few different essentially ways to, I think, help ensure that the budget remains in a place that the board is generally supportive of, both through the higher approval threshold and these other mechanisms that I've talked about. So in kind of closing, we provided the back of the report a number of options should the board be seeking to go down direction. Of course, we're meeting as a committee of the whole in this function, so we're not looking for that direction in this moment per se, but certainly here to answer any questions or help provide information as needed.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so go to the board. Does anybody want to start off? We could sort of go through those 3 items that Jake had just discussed, if that's the board's preference to talk about the 2 jurisdiction issue, then the electoral areas in their entirety needing to be included, and then the max requisition. Does that sound amenable? Okay, so starting with the first issue around our previous discussion of wanting 2 jurisdictions to be able to have that veto control. Any comments? Does Jake's explanation make sense? That it would kind of put in jeopardy the way each director is supposed to be open-minded at the table on any one decision. I see Director Swift has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I can see how the jurisdictional piece could be a bit of an issue, but that's why I'm thinking that having 75% in favor would be a better solution. And then it's regardless of whatever jurisdiction you're in. I don't think we should be fearful of the 75% ask. It's not a big ask, and it works for everybody. I'm not fearful that Courtney would be in a position to veto an acquisition, because if Courtney's not in favor of it, we probably shouldn't be going ahead with it. So I think, you know, I believe in everything that Alana had to say and Doug, because I think our citizens really cherish and value every effort to preserve and protect our parkland. But given the no maximum requisition and no ability to leave the service once it's established, and our endless opportunities to acquire land, this service is going to be likely challenged with lots of tough decisions going forward. And I think it's to require 75% approval, I think is a good safeguard going forward.
Thanks for those comments. Next, we have Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on that comment that Director Swift made, because I'm also considering like what and how this service will work in terms of purchasing pieces of property. You know, I heard a comment about unlimited, supply of land and maybe preferential purchasing of greenways versus, tracts of land. And I'd like maybe to ask staff, like, is that actually true? Like, I was under the assumption that when a piece of property came up for sale that would be amenable to being a parks or a greenway, that, these things don't often happen. But maybe I'm under, a misconception. Would staff be able to maybe just, I don't need, specific pieces of property, but explain like how often do parcels like this come up for sale, and what is the likelihood of being able to prioritize greenways over tracts of land, like for a park specifically?
Through the chair, yes. Director Swift did allude to, there'll be some challenging decisions in the future, and part of those decisions will be looking at the regional land acquisition principles, and then from that, the community helping to develop that land acquisition strategy. But really, you're correct in assuming that, you know, these opportunities are not going to be forthcoming at a regular rate. It may be a piecemeal approach, as other jurisdictions have done, where you identify an area and you just start picking away at it slowly, parcel by parcel, which could take 100 years till you've met your objective or more, if ever. So yeah, there'll be a lot of conversations around that. As far as greenways go, they're typically, we don't exactly know what they look like, but they're typically smaller parcels, but they often also cross more boundaries. So they have their challenges as well. So I think once the priorities are set and we understand clearly from the community through the next stage in this process, if a service is established, we'll be able to start finding those parcels, and we will be limited for sure with the current market of real estate. And it might take a long time for us to achieve those objectives. And today's just a start of understanding that.
So, sorry, go ahead. No,
I was just going to ask comment further. Thanks for that explanation, Doug, because it confirms, I think, what the electoral areas have seen around acquisition of land along trails. I'm thinking the One Spot Trail and the Royston Trail. It's been really difficult to piece together all of the properties along a certain route in order to make a contiguous connection. And, so I just want to, emphasize and probably the other directors don't see these discussions because it is mostly at the electoral areas, how difficult it has been to create the greenways that we currently have, and how it is going to be difficult. So I'm a bit concerned about the language I'm hearing about prioritizing greenways when knowing how difficult greenway acquisition really is. Like you said, a lot, you having to deal with multiple landowners, trying to strike a balance around right of way, and it just gets very complicated. So yeah, I'll just leave that at that comment.
Thank you. Director Grant.
yeah, so Doug, I know how we do this in our community is we buy them through development cost charge, but the principle is the same. So we have a list of parks that we want to acquire, or greenways for that matter. And that's how we establish how much we collect in our DCCs, is what's on the list. Now, it's a little bit difficult when a new piece comes up that we hadn't thought of, but there is a mechanism to be able to do that one too. But the amount of requisition is based on the list that you put together. So we're doing one right now. I won't say where it is, but it's exactly what Director Hamir is talking about. And it's a connection, and it's not the ultimate connection, but it's a piece in the pie. And so if we can get that piece, it might take a while to get the next piece later on, but at least we've got the start to where we're trying to go. So that's how we do it. And so I think that was our kind of thoughts, was that it would be a map or a list or a something. So we had some clue as to what the requisition should be.
Does staff want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can comment. I say DCCs, I can't comment specifically on that. I might give that to Alan. I don't think we'd collect those through the municipalities. It is a way to move forward, and it works well when you're looking at high density development and other costs. And so I'm sure municipalities will continue to use that. It's one avenue. So is partnerships with those private landowners. Sometimes you can achieve those objectives just through a willing landowner who's willing to look at a right of way, either for a certain price or to donate, which we've seen in many cases too. Lastly, and just in setting that requisition, I think we've looked at the $275,000 amount, which achieves a number of things at the beginning. And really, moving forward, if we're not operating large parks, which we actually can do quite efficiently with our services here we provide at the regional district, and just given the nature-based focus of them, it's really going to come down to those questions on whether it's something this board believes they can achieve in a 5-year window, depending on the price tag. and what that borrowing looks like in that 5-year window, or whether it's a 30-year window. And if that's a 30-year window and it's a larger borrowing, then you're going to electoral assent anyway to try and keep the tax dollars, recognizing the impacts of other services on our citizens as well. So it's taken into that holistic picture, which this board and a committee would be able to do and understand the impacts on the committee and then the process to acquire that land. So yeah, if it's a $30 million project that comes out of something that we've never seen, or if it's a $5 million land purchase, there'll be two different avenues that staff would look at. And then that requisition would be going forward. At the same time, you might want to start thinking about putting together some reserve monies, like they've done in other electoral areas, and maybe like they've done in the town of Comox for future requisitions. But you're not going to put together $5 million each year in a reserve without anything to purchase. So it'd just be there to help you along in the future. Well, I'm not saying you're not going to, but no board has ever done that. So I'd be confident that when the big decisions need to be made, they'll be made appropriately by the board.
Thank you, Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the options, one of the things that myself and a couple of other people I think brought up was having those different majorities at different decision points. So I note that the option 3 in the report does talk about having 2/3 on most decisions and recommendations aside from the actual acquisition decision. And I'm just wondering if that might be somewhat of a compromise, because as I mentioned last time, I see that having that 75% kind of from the get-go, it could actually create a barrier to really getting all the information and fleshing something out. So are you able to comment a little bit more about that particular option? Pros, cons, insights on that? Having the two.
Yeah, through the chair. So certainly, I suppose a completely valid option. No major objections from my perspective with regards to it. It's clear, and I think it'd be easy to implement and act upon. It's just a matter of whether the board feels like that's that's what kind of strikes that balance of what you're seeking here with respect to acquisitions and operational decisions. Yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to add. It's
right. Yeah, so it would keep the 2/3 as that original recommendation for everything up until land acquisition. So, okay, thanks.
Madam Chair, maybe I could prompt Doug to give examples of day-to-day operational kinds of decisions, whether it's coming up with a signage plan, design guidelines. What are the types of decisions that might fall to the 2/3 if they went for a split?
And through the chair, I think the largest decision would be at the time of budget time, when we're looking at the 5-year financial plan. And you'd be understanding what it takes to operate whatever existing parks or other planning or processes we're going to put in place for future parks. It would be around those decisions where you'd be looking for 2/3. Other ones would be major capital upgrades to a future existing park system, which might be a bridge or a bridge replacement, or perhaps we get into the capital trail system. We decide we want to more develop a nature park with a more extensive trail system. So that would be some of the opportunities mostly proposed in the 5-year budget period that would look at those decisions in the 2/3. Of course, the 75% would be on those bigger acquisition, which we've already spoken to. So that's generally where you see it. As far as getting down into the minutiae of the details, you won't likely see a lot of that unless it's something that the board brings forward, or it's a major, for example, partnership type sign plan or something where we're working with a different partner and we bring that forward halfway through say it comes up in July and it becomes a priority, or your strategic plan, corporate objectives might set off some priorities before the budget where we might ask for a decision period on too. So typically it's in that budget process.
Thank you. Dr. Grant.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we were looking, or I was anyway, looking at number 3 as probably a pretty viable option and a good compromise as well. I think that once you purchase a park, it's kind of incumbent upon you to look after it anyway. So, I see that as being a reasonable way, and I know we'd be good with that. I won't speak for Maureen, but, or did I just, I don't know. Anyway, she can speak for herself.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Grieve.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think basically here we're focusing on what could go wrong hypothetically and not concentrating on what could go right. A little bit like the family that's arguing over their inheritance, and grandma doesn't even have a spot yet in the old folks' home. So why don't we get this thing going? I mean, 75%, 66.66%. That's what, not even 9 points. So, I mean, it's kind of a hypothetical discussion. I think we went around and around and around in the last meeting on this, and we all kind of agreed that, if this isn't something we have an overwhelming majority to go ahead on, then maybe we shouldn't be looking at it anyways. So I think this isn't a function we're going to be relying on every year, more like every decade, the way I see it, to get these opportunities that we can't resist. Right now, we've got, I was just on the phone to Steve Watson around the BC Hydrolands. And of course, Man Life own the timber cutting rights for that whole stretch. I think they got a 30-meter, not even a 30-meter riparian area from the river, and that's it. And they could theoretically clear cut the whole thing. They want an enormous amount of money. They're working with the land trust, with Tim working to try to make it happen. But, what they want to see is something like $500,000, $600,000 as from the regional district as a partner, just to show good faith to make it go forward with the funders. And it's not easy, this stuff. But, if we pass that up, all the Bevan trails will be gone. So, these are opportunities that there's too big for the electoral areas to look after. We'll still have our own parks function. I imagine we're not rescinding that one. So, we'll still have our own 200,000 to bring to the table for parks that may not be of the regional, have the big regional perspective to it. We'll still be able to do the little stuff. But I say we go ahead and really, we're kind of arguing about nothing because we have nothing yet. So let's make it happen. And we can always, the people who take our place around this table in years to come can always have this discussion and modify it if need be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to staff for the work involved in providing us with these options. I tend to be a fairly concrete thinker, so I just need to get really clear that what we're talking about here is 9 people on a board that makes these decisions. 2/3 of 9 is 6. 75% of 9 is somewhere between 6 and 7. So you need 7 votes, which is actually closer to 78%. So it just helps me in that regard. But I guess the reason that we're saying a percentage rather than just 7 votes is because there is the potential that jurisdiction may get additional votes over time as their population grows, and it could increase to 10. Say Cumberland's population booms, they get a second rep or whatever, right? I got that right? Right. Okay.
Yes.
I think it's important that we do this. I think the option 3 is probably the one that makes the most sense if we don't have agreement from Comox to go with the 2/3. And I don't think the consequences of that are significant enough that we want to hold this thing up. So I'd be prepared to support that option unless I hear something here at the table that convinces me otherwise. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Having spent a few years working in a family law firm, this reminds me a lot of getting a prenuptial together. it's about, as Director Grieve was saying, wondering about the things that could go wrong. And I think you'll hear usually two schools of thought on that. One saying, but we're in love, it's going to be great, which is Director Grieve's approach. And other people saying, well, things could go wrong and perhaps we should just sort them out while we're got a clear head at this point, and not have to wrangle when people are, things are more complicated. And I think both of them are valid. And I think probably what's been getting in the way here has been the feeling that maybe the one party here has kind of come with a bit of a take it or leave it prenup at the altar. And I just want to say that I can live with option 3. I see the merits, as Director Moran was pointing out, and I was pleased to see Director Grant sort of seeing some common ground there as well. And I think that's probably helps take some of the sting off what seems like a take it or leave it thing. But I think as with prenups, like once the ceremony's over and you start making plans together, at that point, you don't think too much of it and you just do the things that make sense and fit the needs of the group. So I don't think there's going to be any great challenges or trauma for us if we do go with 75%. But I do like the idea, just for simplicity of operations, of having 75% for really big things like land acquisition and sort of like and 2/3 for the more kind of day-to-day housekeeping things. It seems like a sensible compromise. It's good to see sides who were not in agreement at our last meeting coming together on this. So I certainly support that option number 3.
Thank you. Alternate Director Monroe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. New kid at the table, and I apologize that I wasn't here for the last debate that went through this, right? But I'm kind of a little hung up on the idea of veto, and that, especially given Jake Martin's sort of approach to governance, where this table is about the interests of the regional district and not individual constituencies. And even, I believe, 66% has the opportunity to provide that veto under certain circumstances, although I'd have to see the numbers again in terms of exactly how the population splits up. And then we can also go and look at other regional districts that have done this, and we find that most of them are based on population representation, but with a simple majority. And we're trying to do something completely different here that will then provide an individual's jurisdiction if they were so inclined to act based on the interests of that jurisdiction rather than this board. And I'm wondering if that, in this idea of a prenup and what could go wrong, is the thing that we really need to consider here, is what could go wrong in terms of perhaps holding a really good plan hostage over a certain interest that may not be in the best interests of the overall region. And maybe there's another compromise to be made here, that land acquisition gets divided, right? And that there is a certain size of land acquisition that the 75% applies to, and maybe not all land acquisitions. But I might even be in favor of option 4, which says, let's go back to the simple majority +1.
Thank you for those comments. Yeah, I think that at this point, to start talking about the size of what the parcels might trigger majority would be really complicating the situation more than necessary. There's a lot of other things that need to be sorted out as far as priority of different types of land, and that all will be discussed once the service is started and this committee is formed. Do you want to follow up?
To be clear, my main point is to structure this in a way that does not allow for a veto. The second part of that was saying, I could get comfortable if I can leave that piece out. But I think the important part here is that a jurisdiction doesn't have veto. Let's do the prenup properly.
Thanks. And I think that was discussed at length at the last meeting. And that's why we had asked Jake to come back and talk about what it would mean to have language in there about forcing 2 jurisdictions within that voting structure, which didn't sound like it actually fit within the principles of local government. So I think that we have to have a little bit of faith in the directors that'll be at the table. Yeah. Any comments from staff? No, okay. Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess my thoughts on this haven't really changed at all since we last discussed it. I think that the 2/3 was probably the optimal, which is why it came through in the staff report. But in order to work together, we have to compromise, and I'm fine with compromising and going ahead at the 75%. It's just because you see something as an ideal doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to go. And I think if we zoom out a bit and look at what the big picture is, you're hard pressed to find a person in any community on Vancouver Island that doesn't think that putting aside some funds towards land acquisition for the public is a bad idea. So, I mean, spending hours arguing about a slight difference in the vote is, I think we've exhausted all the different ways at which we can approach this. And I think we're getting to a point where we can all agree. I would also point out that there's few people that really care where a park is administered from, be it the municipality, the regional district, or even the province. The public cares about having access to parks and how they're maintained and that they exist and that they're looked after, not whether or not they're paying for it on their city, regional, or provincial tax bill. So I also understand the concern about the veto, but realistically, it's 3 separate votes from one municipality, and I just can't foresee a situation where the municipality that pays for half of the requisition roughly somehow sees it's against their interest to provide funds for a park for the region. Like, I'm just not really sure how this conflict of interest would happen, in which the whole community wants to preserve a piece of land except for the city, and then there's a veto. Like, it just seems like a very unlikely scenario. And so to not proceed with this service based on this very unlikely thing that could possibly occur, to me, it's just not really an argument that that pulls me away from being able to support the 75%. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Director Grafe.
Yeah, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, you can always depend on the CVRD board to make the right decision once it exhausts all the other possibilities.
Okay, so I think that we have some agreement on option 3, but I don't want to leave out the other issues that were highlighted at the last meeting. So I think that we can do away with the language around 2 jurisdictions needing to be included. The other thing, of course, was the electoral areas needing to be included in their entirety. Do we have agreement on that? Yes, okay. Checking that off the list. This is the prenup. So the last thing, of course, is the max requisition. And so we're starting out with the 275,000 as our base. Is there any further discussion on the need for a max requisition? Yeah, this is a bit of a speak now or forever hold your peace. I think that, it'll, as I said before, a lot of the things will be decided as we move forward. And staff have discussed how those big purchases and long-term borrowing will need to go to the public anyway. I see some lights on, so Director Moore.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just for clarification, if we set a max requisition, it's relatively easy to change that, correct? To up it, or
We'll let staff answer that.
Through the chair, it would require an amendment to the service establishment bylaw, which there is, of course, a legislative process for that, but wouldn't want to suggest that it's too cumbersome. Typically, or in many cases, if a long-term borrowing requirement was needed for a purchase or something like that, and that servicing that debt would then push the service beyond its maximum requisition. Oftentimes then the elector approval is sought for both the long-term borrowing and the increase to the maximum requisition at the same time. That's certainly the experience in some cases. But if it was just a change to the maximum requisition, it would require an amendment, and that amendment could be sought through consent by 2/3 of the participants to do that.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to add too, if you set a maximum requisition, it's like establishing the size of the football field. We'll draft and develop a team that is based on that size of field. And so it will set the parameters for how we will engage with the public and the extent to which there might be money available. That's not to say it can't change, and Jake has sort of outlined the process that would enable you to change it, but it does set some parameters in terms of the conversation we will have with the community and how we plan and prepare for such a service.
Thank you. And Director McCollum? Oh, no, sorry, it was Director Hamir. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go next, sure. Well, thanks for that clarification. My question I was going to ask was specific to the rural areas. Director Grieve alluded to there's currently a parks requisition in the rural areas. So I just want to clarify, when we start this service, this will be a brand new service apart from, it wouldn't be enveloping what's already currently in place. So that was question one. And just a comment that I wasn't particularly needing to have a maximum requisition. I think as a new service, we need to figure out our plan and figure out, and I didn't want to constrain staff on funds for a strategic plan, and knowing how incredibly important this park service is to the community. I have to say, since our last meeting, I reached out to community members on social media, and I've never gotten the engagement I have. Parks and protecting land is incredibly important, especially in Area B. I just want to get up on my soapbox for a bit. I posted a Google map of the area that was a timeline from 1984 to now, and the change is quite incredible, especially around Comox, around Area B. And Area B is one of those regions that it connects it's around Comox, it's around Courtney, it connects with Area C, and we've seen a huge loss in our tree canopy cover. So, my constituents were really concerned that we weren't going to go forward with this. So I just want to, put my appreciation to staff for doing all the work that they did and providing these options. And then just wanted to say, I'd also trust that staff would not be making this a hyper rich, unnecessary funds going aside just for planning. I have great faith in our staff that we do things at a very cost-effective manner, and doing it right, all the planning that has to be put in place is really necessary. So I know folks will be watching because this is a really important topic for the community, but just wanted to note that I don't have any qualms with not having a maximum requisition at the moment and then moving forward. So going back to the question, I just want to double check. We are going to be having two separate services for rural area tax requisition for regional parks, and then a tax requisition for the more rural parks.
Through the chair, that's correct. You'll have the two separate services, and the finances will be completely separated. There'll be no crossover. Where the crossover may happen in the future is once the strategic plan's done with the regional parks, we'll probably advise the electoral areas to revisit their strategic plans as well, depending on the outcome of that planning process.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not against the idea of having a maximum requisition. I just don't think that we're at the point where we have information to base that decision on. We haven't done any strategic planning, and we have done very little public engagement on this topic as well. So to me, it would make more sense if that's, if there's a wish to set a maximum, we would wait until we're further into understanding what the goals over the next 10 years of the service would be, and then engaging with the public on that and setting a maximum that way, or doing that through a financial planning process and leaving it off the bylaw. But doing it now, it would be just picking a number. And so I just don't really see the benefit of that without any information that would help with that decision. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grieve.
Well, on that topic, we need operational money anyway, just even for planning or anything that moves us forward. So does that, we need a requisition to put money in reserves. So we can't go forward without we're going to operate this thing on what, a feasibility study budget or something, or general administration. I mean, we need money in the kitty, and good luck buying anything out there except maybe a single wide trailer for this kind of money.
Yeah, and so I think that's what we would do is once we've done some strategizing, we could set that level of expenditure. Okay, I don't see any further lights. Oh, Director Hillian, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at the report, which speaks to the amount that was recommended as part of the study, and that apparently was endorsed by the board on May 24th. So it seems like that's the direction that we're headed. I don't have a problem with that. I also wanted to remark on our alternate director's concerns about the veto, which hopefully have been allayed somewhat. But I think it's probably inevitable that at some point in the distant future, when most of us are dead and gone, that there will be some dispute about this. And that'll be something for the people of the day. But there are tons of people in the community who want to see us move forward with this from all different segments of the community. We've heard that in public presentations to our council when the Stoughton Falls issue was up. I've seen it on social media. We're hearing in relation to the public consultation we're currently doing in relation to McPhee Meadows. And so I think that we'll be met with a lot of support for moving this forward. Despite the somewhat confusing mixing of metaphors between football games and prenuptials that characterizes the discussion here today. So anyway, I just hope we can move forward with this and really appreciate the work staff have done to get us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Alternate Director Monroe.
Thank you. Just final comment. I have a strong belief around the veto, but I also have a very strong belief that this park service needs to move forward. So, this is, as we consider it, we consider the whole and how we do it to start with. And I love the analogy of the prenup, because you think about these things. You think about what you want when we're all not around the table, and others 5 to 10 years from now are trying to figure out what were you guys trying to do. Right. So yes, I am totally in support of moving forward with something here. I just want it to be the best thing that we can come up with that will survive the test of time.
Thank you. And so I think that we are at a spot where we can move forward. So just to staff, do we need a recommendation to the board for later on what we've distilled down today? Jake?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think as long as the board and you as Chair feel confident that there's consensus around, I think, the approach that the board wishes to take with respect to the bylaw is on the agenda for the meeting at 4 p.m. And there's then, of course, the motion that had been moved and seconded with respect to amending that. So the report speaks to kind of how the board could navigate that situation. But yeah, I guess I just encourage the board to ensure that you feel comfortable as much as you can with having that sort of support for whichever model you wish to take, and then no decisions are required at this point, just to carry that forward into the into the board. And if it is option 3 that the board is leaning towards, then it speaks to essentially dealing with the current motion that had been moved and seconded, and then further amending the bylaw to address option 3. So if that's clear, hopefully that's clear. If not, please let me know.
Okay, is that good? Any further discussion? All right. And all in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And we'll adjourn. Thank you. All in favor? Great. Thanks, everyone.